Good afternoon everybody, it's your pal Martin the Red here, hope you're going well. I was just going through Instagram yesterday and I was really shocked to see this post that compared holiday destinations, like from least expensive to most expensive. Okay, and the funny thing is I had been to a lot of these places in the last 15 years or so. I've been to 116 nations. Just if you give or take, if you take away 2 points from me for just changing planes in Nairobi and Ivory Coast. So it says the most cheapest and expensive countries to visit in 2025, and basically saying average daily budget in US dollars. Now the cheapest countries were Laos at 50 bucks a day, followed by Kazakhstan, Rwanda, Ghana, Mongolia, Armenia, Burkina Faso, Georgia, Mali, Myanmar, Cuba, Moldova, India, Malawi, and Nepal. Now, I've been to a lot of these countries. I've been to Laos, Kazakhstan, Ghana, Armenia, Burkina Faso, Georgia, Myanmar, Moldova, India, and Nepal. Now, when I was in Laos 9 years ago, I didn't spend a night there. I just went there for a day trip, just going over the border to mark it off. And I believe I must have spent more than 15 US dollars because the visa cost me $35. And I just basically just got around town on foot. As for Kazakhstan, accommodation would cost, thinking for a dorm bed would be about £6 to £8 sterling a night for me. I don't know what it's like in US dollars, but yeah, Kazakhstan would be quite cheap. In Ghana, my accommodation was a tenner a night in this hostel, and I kept all my eating down to $5 a day, which is good. Armenia, it was definitely like a low-cost country, I agree with that. But Burkina Faso, I spent £35 sterling for 2 nights in Ouagadougou last year, but I had to pay a lot more to get around town. I hired a driver to take me to all these locations for safety measures, and that cost me roughly, I think, it was like 34 euros, because the sefer is pegged to the euro at 660 sefer to a euro. Okay. And then Georgia is quite cheap. I've been there myself, I can count that. But a country like Mali, I believe that in the current times in Mali, a room in, let's just say, Bamako would cost, when I look it up on booking.com, it would be maybe 20 US dollars a night. But you gotta think like food, you gotta also implement like food and transport. And let's not forget, this doesn't even include like flying to the country. Like I've spent a lot of money to fly to Mali just to say that I've spent $29 a day. As for Myanmar, I've only been there for a couple of hours on a border crossing. I spent less than $34 because I didn't stay there overnight. As for Moldova, I spent less than $35 a day. Stayed in a hostel for €8 a night. Maybe just spent €5 on food. I eat at a supermarket, so I keep my costs low. As for India, I had to pay like 50 bucks in total for 2 nights, and it also included transport from the airport, which was a dumb thing I had to do, but that was before I ever had a smartphone. And Nepal, I paid like 15 bucks for a room the last time I was in Kathmandu. It was okay, but I just didn't like the country that much. So it goes to like expensive stuff, like they think you'd spend $330 a day in Barbados. I haven't been to Barbados yet, but I know what I'm going to do when I hit the ground running. I'm going to get a local bus from the airport to get to my accommodation. I'm going to stay in somebody's Airbnb for $25 a day. I'm just going to get a bus around town. I'm not going to go eat out at restaurants because they're overpriced. Because they accept US dollars, but for me, as a British citizen with pound sterling, I would get much more money if I were to basically exchange pounds for Barbadian dollars. Antigua and Barbuda, I spent $100 a night in a hotel not far from the airport, just for what, 15 hours a kip, until I could get my flight next day. So, but I don't really see the price tag of like $310 a day. It just depends on what you want to do. If you want to do like scuba diving, snorkeling, all that type of like fancy crap, you're gonna pay much more money for that type of stuff. I'm not that type of person who wants to do adventurous stuff. I like seeing monuments. I like going to churches. I like learning about the history of a country. St. Kitts and Nevis, it said most expensive was number 3, cost of $271 a day. I paid £220 for a return flight from Antigua to St. Kitts. I walked from the airport to my Airbnb. My Airbnb was £50 a night. A shack, a lovely shack with a kitchen and bathroom behind this lady's business. Beautiful. I spent like $30 on a boat trip to get out to Nevis with a bunch of my South African buddies I just met. I did a shack, but I spent, I remember, what do I think about it? I think I'd probably say I spent roughly $100 on my first day in St. Kitts and Nevis. And this is a country that I didn't even use any public transport. I actually walked all around both St. Kitts and Nevis. Maldives, they're charging $267 per day. Now, I really want to get to Maldives, but there's this like hostel, sleeping pod in Mali, the capital. But it's not really, if you want to stay in the Maldives, you have to stay in a government certified hotel. And this pod hostel doesn't really cut it. They don't really like, I don't think they'll allow foreigners to stay there. So you have to basically have proof of hotel bookings, so you have to roughly pay 50 quid a night for a room somewhere in Mali. Otherwise, you're going to be paying a lot of money for all these resorts, and that's not my type of thing. Grenada, $258. I haven't been to Grenada yet, so I can't really comment, but I know my plan, my strategies about how I'm going to keep my costs low, stay in an Airbnb, take local buses, walk everywhere, eat street food. United States, $248 a day. They didn't really say what part of America this was. So this could be LA, this could be New York, whatever. I paid about $70 for a room in Buffalo when I was there for a couple of days, 15 years ago, my first ever trip. And also Switzerland. I've been to Switzerland myself, but I didn't stay a night because hostels, they like to charge between 50 to 60 pounds a night, and I ended up paying 70 quid to get the fuck out of Zurich. I basically took a bus from Belgium to Zurich, and then I spent most of the day in Liechtenstein, and then I went back to Zurich and took a bus to Zagreb because it was much cheaper. I didn't feel like I could spend overnight, but I will go back to Switzerland next year around the Olympics, and my cousin lives in the southern part of Switzerland in the Italian-speaking area. I need to see her, it's been so damn long. But I'm not going to be paying $250 a day, I can tell you that. There's like Micronesia, $248. A lot of these Pacific Island countries are really expensive because of logistics about flying there and accommodation. I remember I spent $70 Australian a night to stay in an Airbnb in Port Moresby, but it cost me $550 to fly there for 2 days, and Australian customers were fucking with me just for taking a 2-day trip, which I gave them the 2-finger salute and told them where my ancestors came from. Britain. Greenland. This is a Danish territory I want to visit soon, but it's going to cost me £450 to the cheapest I can get to Nuuk from Reykjavik is 400 quid. I believe if I stay at the hostels, they're going to be charging at least 25 sterling a night. and I'd have to stay in Nuuk for about 4 or 5 days because there's only like 2 flights a week from Reykjavik to Nuuk. So I can't really say that I'm going to spend $221 for a day in Nuuk. It just depends on what you want to do. The UAE, I've been to the UAE so many times, but I've never spent more than 24 hours. On my last trip to the UAE, I spent £16 in taxis getting to the Abrahamic Faith House back in the hostel. I spent £14 for like an 8-hour kip at the hostel before I had to fly back. I don't think you could spend $220 a day in the UAE. And then they've got like Bahamas. Bahamas is $270. Now, Nassau, the cheapest accommodation I found in Nassau in the Bahamas is roughly, I'm going to put it in dollars, I think it's like roughly $30 for a dorm bed. Yeah, but you got to remember they also use US dollars in the Bahamas. Oman, $214. I was in Oman for 48 hours earlier this year. It only cost me $1.20 to get to my accommodation. I spent maybe $2 on breakfast, $4 on lunch. I did buy an overpriced cup of coffee at this place. But it all just depends on exchange rates because the Omani rial is quite a strong currency. Like 1 rial is worth £2.50. But I spent £18 in total for staying in this really nice hostel in Muscat. I love Oman, I'd like to go back there as soon as I can, but I have to incorporate it into a trip to Yemen. But I swear I'm not going to spend $214. Sao Tome and Principe is an island in the Atlantic off the coast of Ghana and Gabon. They say you'll spend $211 a day. Now, it's not cheap to fly there. The cheapest I can find flights there is via Angola for $3.90 return, and I may consider going there for my birthday this year. But accommodation would be £15 to £20 a night. And also, it's like the currency is really lowly valued. It's got too many zeros. It's like if $1 would buy you maybe like 1,000 dobro or something like that. I really didn't look up, or maybe the currency is changing whatsoever. But there's no way to spend $211 a day in Sao Tome and Principe if you were staying in hostels. But yeah, but if you were like, let's just say, to get around public transport, much cheaper. But if you were hire a driver, hiring a driver in a foreign country is like $50 a day in a third world place. Puerto Rico, I can only say this because I've never been there. They say you'd spend $190 a day in Puerto Rico. I'm not going to comment on Puerto Rico because I've never been. I've got no ambition of going there. But a lot of these Caribbean countries are quite expensive. I've even looked at accommodation in Turk and Caicos. The cheapest hotel I could ever find was asking me like $200 a night. No way I'd want to go there, even if I have to go through bloody Turk and Caicos to get to Haiti. And also Turk and Caicos is still owned by Britain. And then last on the list was Qatar at $188. I was in Qatar for 8 hours this year. Flew in from Jordan, flew out to Bahrain. Spent 6 rial to get out to the city centre. Spent roughly my Yemenite dinner was roughly a tenner, and I didn't do any really silly. I did see some attractions, but that cost me nothing. But I didn't do any really extreme activities. But I only spent in total less than 20 quid in my 8 hours in Qatar, so it was doable. I mean, but you're saying to me like, oh man, you just basically just going through these countries, you're just traveling through, you're not spending a night there. I'm like, of course, but I mean, it's a good way to mark off a country is to get out of the airport and make it count and see something. It's like, if you were to come to Britain right now, many years ago you could stay in a hostel where I used to live in for about £8 sterling a night. But I reckon the hostel I used to live in is now asking £20 sterling a night because things go up. I just came back from Dublin 2 weeks ago where I spent £120 sterling on a room for 2 nights. That same room in Belfast would have at least cost me £40 a night. But that's just different places. Like, I shouldn't really be comparing my Airbnb I spent in Wales for 40 quid a night comparing to what I spent in Dublin. It's just Dublin. They always say, yeah, Dublin's expensive. They always say Qatar's expensive, Switzerland's expensive. Yes, but there's way to keep your costs low. And I remember when I first went to Norway 7 years ago, I spent £15 sterling a night sleeping in this American exile's Airbnb in her living room, and it was fantastic. And sadly, this woman passed away a year later. And I'll never forget my first visit to Oslo, Norway. Anyway, this is Marty Melhead, over and out.